Hi guys, it's Nicole, and today I am sharing a project featuring cut-to-you digital cut files. I do not have my typical intro setup for this video. Normally I kind of take you guys through my process, the supplies that I have picked. In this instance, I kind of intentionally chose not to do that. I was not really in the right headspace to do that. And I wasn't really pulling from my stash like I typically would. Because I'm doing a 4th of July layout, I tend to keep those supplies kind of housed together. And when I'm doing patriotic themed pages, I just pull that whole thing out, and it's typically the exact same supplies that you kind of see me flipping through and whatnot. The other reason I chose not to do it was because at this point I still don't have my cut file cut out. I was really running into a lot of issues with my machine. I ended up going ahead and ordering a newer Cameo, and I needed to wait for that to get shipped so that I could cut out my cut file. So in the meantime, I went ahead and started my layout. I did go ahead and I paired this up with for those of you that are playing along with the 4x6 sketches from Allison Davis, this one is going to be my take on sketch number 6. I did stick pretty close to it. The only substitution that I'm going to do, and was kind of why I chose to pair this sketch with a cut file from Cut to You, is if you have the sketches, the area that I'm going to put my cut file showed a landscape 6x4 photo. And as soon as I saw it and I saw kind of the stars that she had depicted on the layout, it made me think of the Fireworks frame that I had already downloaded from the shop. So I figured it would be a good swap to just swap out that photo, put the Fireworks frame up there, and use that to kind of house my journaling and then kind of build everything from there. Now, I will tell you that typically any kind of slanted or tilted designs I don't like. I struggle with them. I think because for me, I really need them to be like as straight as they can possibly be. I can't just sort of start gluing one down and going off of that. I really want to make sure that my first one is going to sort of be the correct angle so that everything else from there is the right angle. So I took a little bit of extra time than I normally would to kind of map out where my papers were going to go, the angle that they needed to be, and all that. Typically, when I pick my pattern papers, it's probably 60 or 70% B-sides. And then I like to pick more, I guess you would say A-sides or bold patterns that have all of the colors. So for me, it would be the aqua with the stars on it, and then the navy with the fireworks on it. Those are the ones that I like to include as like the more busy papers that all of my B-sides are sort of being matched up to. I did give myself a pencil line of where my photos were going to be because I decided that I was going to have my photos kind of go over the choppy edges of the pattern papers, and I wouldn't have to trim those down. And it was just going to make life a little bit easier. My background papers are also just some cheap gray cardstock. I knew that because this was going to kind of be a wallpapered type of layout where you weren't even going to see the background, I decided not to use my favorite textured white cardstock in this instance. And I will say I took a lot of time to figure out the pattern papers and the angles because, like I said, I didn't want to sort of start laying them out and then have something not be lined up correctly because it was going to throw off pretty much everything. So I kind of double checked the guidelines that I had made myself, double checked that everything was where it was going to be, and I use things like tape to kind of hold my paper down to the mat. I'm using the grid lines on my mat to make sure I'm lining things up. Kind of can't tell because I have zoomed in at this point. I'm not even sure why I've zoomed in, but I did. And as I go along, I am trying to cut off sort of the stuff that's overhanging. I wanted to make sure it was really straight, so I didn't want to do like scissors or anything like that, especially on these ones right here because they're going to continue over into the second page. Struggled with my trimmer, so I just busted out a ruler and an X-Acto knife and decided to just kind of try to be as careful as I could with this method because, again, I wanted to make sure that everything was kind of as straight as possible because I think that those are the things that you sort of notice if they start getting kind of out of whack. From there, I went ahead and started, well, no, I didn't. I was going to start putting my photos on until I remembered that while my prints are 4x6s, I had actually done 4x6 sized photo collages. So there's white lines between the photos, but for whatever reason, I could not get a thin white frame around them when I was printing. So an easy method that I've kind of been doing to just save myself some aggravation regarding that is to just do some white acrylic paint and a sponge dauber and add some white paint to the edges of the photos. I like to make sure that you can kind of see even just a small line like this between the photos. I think it just kind of helps them look like separate photos and not where they're all touching without like a line. Definitely a personal preference. You don't have to do that. So at this point, I figured, okay, while my paint is drying, I'm going to go ahead and just continue the pattern papers over. I don't need to make those measurement marks on the right-hand page because I'm basically going to use the pattern papers on the left as my guide to get everything on the right lined up. And then I did tape my 2 pages together because this white and gray strip is going to cross that border. And I figured out pretty quickly that I actually needed a full-size strip there. And again, I just keep going with this pattern that I have figured out that I like the look of. I tend to make sure those multicolored patterns are not right next to each other. That's just something that I prefer. I know everybody kind of has their preference for how they mix and match their pattern papers. And that's something that I do tend to kind of really pay attention to on other people's layouts because to me, that's kind of the difficult part for me is picking papers that go together and then putting them in an order that I like. And a lot of times I don't film that because it's literally just me sitting here shuffling different patterns back and forth and taking pictures of them until I get an order that I like. It's not something that sort of comes naturally to me. It's something that I just sort of play around with until I get something that I like. From there, I went ahead and started attaching my photos. In this instance, because it's sort of that wallpaper method, I just went and put my adhesive direct to the background, and then I can use my photos against each other to just kind of make sure that they are squared up. And then from there, I took this layout downstairs. I didn't film the stitching. I did go through and I stitched straight lines on those pattern paper strips, and I tried to do some like details on the stars. I ended up not liking it, and I just kind of moved on from there. And then because I keep pulling these products out and digging through them, I finally just decided to go ahead and temporarily attach them to some cardstock. It's been a while, probably over a year, maybe 2 years ago. Heather Balzer was doing a series on her channel, and she was showing where before she even started, she opened up all her stuff and did something like this with her embellishments. And I was like, oh man, that's so smart. Like, you don't have to keep digging through stuff. You can just kind of have your stuff always visible in a sense. So I decided to go ahead and do that. I used full-size sheets of paper instead of the smaller ones like she did, only because this is something that I'm not necessarily working through and trying to do like a kill a kit on. It's something that will continually be put away and taken out as I need patriotic themed product. So I kept the sheets of paper full size, and I just kind of sorted stuff into things like titles, words. I think so. Like this one has titles and like phrases and stuff like that. One of them I did like big icons, so like the eagle and the mouse and like the camper and the bike and stuff like that. This, oh, I can't think of what the brand is. And it's not on the screen. Anyways, one of them is for sure Doodlebug. The other one I'm spacing on what it is, but about half of the stuff was acetate. So you can see those little orange pieces of tape. I just use tape to stick them down because acetate isn't like removable adhesive wasn't going to stick to it. So I used tape. And I just kind of organized stuff into like repetitive designs, small icons, large icons, that kind of thing. I did a quick run through and pulled out things that I was for sure wanting to use. And then I just kind of set it to the side, knowing that I will come back and continue to pull stuff from that as I sort of like fill in the area. So again, the sketch that I'm following, she had like a repeated icon going across the border. So the sketch showed like stars. I am going to do kind of like my mismatch shelf method of a bunch of die cuts together. Before I do that, I want to double check the placement of this cut file. Here you can see I'm cutting 2 stars off. That's actually the top of the design. Originally, I was going to have it like it's depicted in the store where the swirl is actually on the bottom. But I quickly figured out that most of the photos going across the top didn't really have any open space that I could kind of cover up, and it was going to run into some faces. And so when I flipped it over, I realized that if I cut the 2 stars off, it would kind of fit more flush to the photos. So I went with that. While I was digging in my stash, I keep coming across these transparency sheets that I have and never seem to find a way to use them. And so I got the smart idea, dumb idea, I'm not really sure. I got the idea to try and back this cut file with those. It worked. It took me a while to find a pen that would show up that I could trace the shape. I ended up using like a white gel pen that doesn't really fully dry, so it was kind of all over my hands, but I just needed it to work just enough to give me a rough shape that I could cut out. And I know even as I'm doing it, I'm sitting here cutting these out and I'm thinking that they're going to be difficult to see because it's a pattern on a transparency that I'm then overlaying on a pattern paper. And I kept kind of holding it over it and I was like, you know what? I don't know. And I finally just decided, you know what? I'm just going to do it. Even if it's not super visible, it's fine. I did cut out a lot of that process out of the video, but you'll see it in the finished photos. You'll be able to see like the stitching and the transparencies and stuff like that. Now, knowing that I'm going to be tucking in a bunch of die cuts and stickers along the top, I like to have a border to just kind of have a more like finished edge there. So I found some silver like textured cardstock and I cut 2 little thin strips, and I'm not going to put them on until I've got all my embellishments on because I like having the strip kind of cover everything, and it just sort of hides all the rough edges and all the things that are supposed to look like they're tucked behind the photos, but really they're just kind of sitting there, if that makes sense. And you saw me cutting like the big floral in half. I do that a lot, especially with like these banners that I'm tucking, the fireworks that I've used before. Those big pieces, I will almost always cut them in half and just be able to put them in more than one place, especially in this design method where things are tucked behind things anyways. Now, when I cut the one in half, it ended up having hearts be upside down. I'm not really concerned about that. You can see I've covered up one with the firework. I covered up the other one with this little doodlebug heart. I don't really focus on things like that because I know that I can go back and cover it with something else. I just go through and start filling things in. And then once I've kind of figured out where I want everything, sometimes I'll do this where I leave everything there and I'll just kind of pick it up and squirt some glue behind it That way I don't have to take a picture of it. I don't have to kind of keep moving things around. I just try to keep it in place and glue everything down before I move anything else. And even here you can see there's still some spaces, so like I just kind of keep going back to the stuff that I have, and I'm filling in gaps, I'm filling in open spaces. And I keep in mind that I have not gone to the sticker sheet yet, where there's typically like smaller phrases and smaller icons and just different things to kind of tuck in place. And then my title I actually got from those little acetate things. It is a little bit like skewed. That was sort of just how it came from Doodlebug, but I went ahead and used it. Normally I would cut a backer piece for this. I was too lazy. I just used the actual like inside cut piece, cut it with that same white and gray pattern paper, and then I lined it up, formatted my journaling to fit within there, and then I'm going to run that pre-cut piece of pattern paper through my printer and have my journaling just kind of be directly on there instead of dealing with journaling strips in this instance. I felt like journaling strips was just going to kind of be a little bit messy. Plus, when I was originally looking at the sketch and deciding to swap out that photo for this fireworks frame, I figured it would be a really good place to kind of just tie in either my title or my journaling. In this instance, I ended up going with my journaling. And then here you can kind of see a little bit better. I've got some of the stars have transparencies, some of them have vellum, and some of them have a red glitter paper. And then because this wasn't like a traditional piece of like backing to where the whole cut file was going to be one die cut that I could glue onto my layout, the journaling piece is actually more like what you would call an inlay piece. So I just glued parts of the frame down a little bit at a time and kind of worked my way around, and just was really careful to try to line everything up and make sure that everything was kind of straight to that inlay piece. And I was kind of surprised that all the transparencies and the vellum ended up drying pretty secure. Nothing popped off. I was a little worried about that. Everything ended up drying really well. So from there, I'm going to go ahead. I did use foam strips to pop up my title piece, which I thought I was going to do 4th of July and just go get some letter stickers. And then I decided I could just completely omit the letter stickers if I just did July 4th. So I just went ahead with that. And then this is where I was talking about how I go back to the sticker sheet and I start finding additional pieces, smaller pieces, specific colors, and just different things to kind of start filling in so that all of my embellishments and interest going across isn't just the same material. It's not all die cuts, it's not all paper, it's not all the same sizes and stuff like that. I like to try and mix in as many different things as I can. And then of course I sent a message to a friend. Of course, as soon as I got done with the layout and photos and everything, I found these little tiny like patriotic confetti things that I had bought a long time ago. And I forgot to use them. Like they were not stored with my patriotic stuff, which they will be now. So I have a feeling that when I go back to put this layout and some of the other ones that I've done recently into my albums, I'm going to pull those confetti embellishments out and just add a bunch to like all those layouts to add an even like smaller thing, because typically I would have gone back with like enamel dots or sequins or something. Today with this one I just wasn't really feeling it. So yeah, one of the last things that I did do, instead of dating this layout, because July 4th is always on July 4th, I don't really date those layouts. I usually just put the year somewhere. So I grabbed some Doodlebug, like tiny alphas, and there's this like circle one. I don't typically go for the circle ones, but in this instance, I was kind of specifically looking for a different shape to kind of break up some of the stuff that was going on, and I feel like it works. And I do like to layer it across different things. So like it's touching part of the frame, it's touching the stars, that kind of thing. So yeah, there is my finished layout. And again, this is for cut to you, but it's also double dipping into the 4x6 sketch series. So I will definitely be adding this to that playlist and linking all the different information, all the different stuff down below. So take a look there. Also, think about joining my Facebook group because we're talking about these sketches and we're talking about a lot of different like planning and prepping for things coming up. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys here and I'll catch you again later.